another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Podcast. I'm Edison Vasquez. Thanks for joining us today. Hope everyone is doing well. Today we are doing episode 15 and we're discussing common terms on industrial real estate leasing. You can watch us online on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ComRealEdison. You can also listen to us on the podcast platform that you preference. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or any other podcast platform that you receive. Please follow me online. You can find me on our website, warehousesmarket.com. You can also find me on social media, on Instagram at Edison Industrial, on Twitter, Edison CRE, and on LinkedIn, Edison Vasquez PA. Thanks for joining us today as we discuss common terms on industrial real estate leasing. So this podcast is based on our blog that we did a few weeks ago on our website, warehousesmarket.com. You can find the blog there is like that we did a guide of common industrial real estate leasing terms and languages that landlords and tenants use. And there's multiple terms that tenants and landlords can get familiar with. And for this episode, we picked the top 5 that we hear most commonly and that I think are more helpful for tenants and landlords. So we picked these topics as a way to help tenants and landlords familiarize with terms that sometimes are not very common or tenant or landlord might not be aware. As you probably know, leasing a warehouse sometimes can be a complicated process and it turns out to be a little more difficult than a tenant or a landlord expect. And there are many terms that are not heard often, and landlords and tenants need to be familiar with that. On this blog, like we mentioned, we put all the terms in our podcast. We are discussing the top 5 terms. So here are the top 5 terms that are important to remember for landlords and tenants as well during the leasing process of a warehouse. The number 1 term is base rent. So base rent is the rent that will be paid directly to the landlord, and this is applicable mostly for leases that are triple net leases, where the landlord breaks down the expenses for operating expenses of the building. So for example, if the rent is $10 per square foot and the base rent is $7, that means $7 goes to the landlord and the other $3 are broken down between expenses for property taxes, property insurance, and the common area maintenance or maintenance of the building in general. So base rent applies for the rent that is paid directly to the landlord, and also the rent that will be applicable for annual increases. So when you're doing lease negotiations, you will hear expenses that are, increases that will go up every year. So it can be 1, 2, 3, 4%, which is more common in the type of industrial leases. So you will hear an annual increase of 3 to 4% on the base rent. So that's the rent that's directly goes to the landlord before expenses of the building and property taxes. Term number 2, common area maintenance. As we mentioned, the first one, that's part of the expenses to maintain the building, and most landlords have different definitions for this common area maintenance, but it's basically the maintenance as applies common area. The exterior, landscape, painting, it might include the roof, windows, anything that has to do with the exterior of the building, and to maintain the building in good shape, including parking lots, fences, trees, anything that has to do with the image or the structure or the building. So those are common area maintenance that the landlord will apply, and this will show up in your lease. If you're leasing a space, you will see a breakdown of these expenses, and depending on the landlord, if it's a sophisticated landlord or institutional landlord, every year you will get a statement from the landlord outlining and breaking down all the expenses that they are going through in the year, and sometimes it might increase, sometimes it might not, and it all depends on the landlord. When you're negotiating a lease, something to keep in mind for these expenses is there is a way that tenants can negotiate a cap or a ceiling on the increases for controllable expenses. So the landlord doesn't go crazy and uses the most expensive landscape, the most expensive parking lot. So there's way for tenants to be protected. So the increases for these common area maintenance don't go over a certain percentage per year. So those are things that you can remember when you're negotiating a lease agreement. Number three, very common, and we explained this in another video that you can look at, is a gross lease and a triple net lease, NN lease. So these are two different leases that, depending on landlord, applies. For the most part, you see a triple net lease from most sophisticated institutional landlords, but a lot of landlords still do gross leases. So the difference is a gross lease is when you see a full amount covering all the base rent plus the operating expenses. So the property taxes, property insurance, and the common area maintenance for the property are all included into one lease rate. For example, the landlord does a lease to you for $10 per square foot, and that includes your base rent, your property taxes, your property insurance, and your common area maintenance. And a triple net lease, it could be the same amount, it could be the same $10, except the landlord will break down the base rent. In this case, for example, let's use $7, and then add property taxes, property insurance, and any maintenance that's required for the building, and any increases will apply to the base rent, and then the operating expenses can vary year by year depending on the property taxes, insurance, and the maintenance of the building. Whereas in a gross lease, the landlord for the most part will be responsible for any increases on the expenses and property taxes, and they will give you a fixed 3-4%, whatever annual increase you negotiate with the landlord throughout the lease term. So that's a gross lease versus triple net lease. So those are terms to consider when you're negotiating a lease, either as a landlord or as a tenant. Number four, build out and leasehold improvements. So these are terms that, in the case of a new building or a building that needs improvements, the landlord will look to build out, as the term explains, will build out their office space or anything that's specific to the property. It can be new lining, it can be a new shipping office, it can be another little structure in the building, it can be a concrete ramp in the exterior, it can be more loading doors. So different things that the tenant might require when they're leasing a space. And depending on the accounting or the way they set up the build out of the developer, these improvements can be depreciated as expenses, so landlords can depreciate these expenses and be helpful for taxes at the end of the year, so they're not capitalized into the building. So those are a build out and leasehold improvements. So when you're negotiating as a tenant and you hear a build out, then the landlord will quote you or negotiate the build out, whether it's new office space or remodel the office space, improve the warehouse lining, more power, anything that requires an improvement for the building and that's specific for the business that can help the tenant. Last term, lease concessions. So these are also terms that you will hear during the lease negotiation, and it's basically the landlord providing some help, or it can be a free rent, it can be cash for build out, or some kind of compensation for the tenant taking over the build out, or for signing a long-term lease, or putting equipment that not necessarily improves the value of the property, but it helps the tenant get the business going and generate revenue. So the landlord might give some concessions to the tenant, whether it's 1, 2, 3 free rents months, or it can be a cash, a terminal improvement allowance for building out office space, for putting new lining, remodeling the loading doors, anything that can apply and specifically for that space that's being leased. So those are concessions that landlords can give to tenants, and this can be all together. The landlord can build out the space at their cost, and they can also and add concessions such as free rent, or we'll build the office space and they will also give you 1, 2, 3 months free rent depending on the negotiations that's being done during the lease process. Or the landlord can say, no, we'll deliver the space in shell condition and you can do the build out, and we'll give you a tenant improvement allowance of X amount and you can do that based on your needs. So those are things to consider when you're here during negotiations, lease concessions. So those are the top 5 that we hear more common during lease negotiations, and there are many others that you can see again on our blog. You can go warehousesmarket.com/blog, and you can see our post this on a guide to common industrial leasing terms. So go check them out. You can always leave us your comments and your questions about anything that you don't understand, and of course our team is happy to help. Even if you're not ready to lease a space, we'll be happy to guide you and give you some advice on things to do during leasing a warehouse space, and some terms that you may not be familiar with. So we're happy to help on that end. And then our next section of the podcast is feature property. So we try to feature one of our listings during the podcast, and in this case we're going to feature one of our we call our trophy listings, our larger listing that we have, and this is a building here in Doral. It's inside America's Gateway Park. It's 1800 Northwest 89 Place. This building was built in 1990, and we currently have it for sale or lease. It's 106,046 square feet of total space with refrigeration. It has about 62,000 square feet of refrigerated space, 22 loading docks, ramp. It sits on 5.88 acres, and it has about 200 parking spaces. The building is pristine condition. Office space in the middle is a large atrium. Is a great headquarters building. Right now, it's most of the warehouse is mostly refrigerated, so it's a great for a company that's looking to expand their logistics footprint and expand into the cold storage or refrigerated space. You can go to the website doralbuilding.com. You can see the information for the building, all the pictures. We have a video on it, and you can contact us if you'd like more information or more questions. This can also be a great investment for institutional investors looking to buy a large building in South Florida. It's 106,000 square feet on 5.8 acres, 3 miles west of Miami International Airport, and refrigeration. So that's a great advantage for attracting companies that can use all the refrigeration or temperature control in general. Plus, it does have a backup generator, as we are in South Florida, so hurricanes are very common in the summertime. So the backup generator will help power the entire facility, or most of the facility, more importantly the refrigerated space, for a downtime when there's no electricity. So this building, 106,000 square feet, available for seller lease. For sale, the lease price is $12 per square foot triple net, and the sale price is $17,500,000 for sale. And last but not least, before we finish another episode, is our industrial tip, and this is to help tenants or landlords during the leasing or sale process. So our industrial tip related to this specific topic is to accommodate tenants in the case of building out space. So what we see a lot of times is tenants, in the effort to save money, they think they could save money by taking over the build out cost or the task of building out their own office space, or putting equipment or refrigeration. And a lot of times they underestimate the process or the time and the cost that it will take. So what we suggest is, if you're looking for a space that for your business, it's recommended that you shift all that responsibility to the landlord, and ask the landlord to deliver a turnkey space. So whether it's just from a plain warehouse space with 10% office space and loading doors and a few ramps, to a specialized space for manufacturing or refrigeration, cold storage, rail, anything that has to do specific. See if you try to shift that responsibility for the landlord, as the landlord, the developer, might have more knowledge and more power to build out that space, and can save you time and money at the same time, because what we see is tenants try to build out their own facility, and sometimes it takes double the time and 50% or even 100% more cost than the developer doing that and paying a little more rent. So if you're looking to for a build to suit or a custom build space, shift that responsibility to the landlord, and you concentrate about your business and ask for a turnkey space that can be used for your business specifically. And even if you have to pay a little more rent or amortize that over the term of the lease, it might be the smart decision over the long term, as it can be a huge task to undertake the build out of the space. Hope this helps. As always, we welcome your feedback. We would love to hear from you. Let us your questions or comments. And thanks for always checking us. We're always happy to help our clients. You can find us on our website, warehousesmarket.com. You can find all the information about us and what we do. Our team is excited to help clients in the search of warehouse space, and also owners in the leasing and sale of warehouse space in South Florida and throughout the United States. We have our connections through our CCIMs and SIR networks, where we can help many businesses throughout the nation and throughout the world. You can follow us online. Don't forget to check out our other podcasts and our other videos on our podcast platforms. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Spotify. You can listen to them when you're on the road or going to see clients or going on a family trip. Don't forget to listen to us. Also, you can watch our videos on our YouTube channel. You can go to youtube.com/Convertible Edison. You'll see all of our videos that we've done throughout this time, and you can find helpful tips about industrial real estate. Finally, you can find me online. Please follow me on social media, on Instagram at Edison Industrial, on Twitter at Edison CRE, on LinkedIn, Edison Vasquez PA. That concludes our episode 15. Thanks for joining us. Leave us your questions or comments. Don't forget to subscribe. Take care. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Take care.